Right, so we will get started. So, good afternoon. Director General Jeju, Deputy Secretary, Deputy Assistant Secretary Melissa Simpson, participant, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Jeju Forum session on Korea-U.S. energy cooperation. And my name is Jason Lee, session chair. And I'm currently a professor and journal chair at Korea University. I'm truly privileged to chair this session. This session was planned as a part of track 1.5 discussion on Korea-U.S. energy cooperation with the participation of government officers and experts from both countries. Energy security and energy business have long been key agenda of foreign policy of both countries. And during the Cold War period, for example, the stable energy supply from the Middle East has long been a vital national interest of the United States, and as well the vital interest of Korea. Nowadays, energy cooperation covers a much broader agenda ranging from oil and gas to renewable energies, climate changes, as well as energy technology and infrastructure. And during the past decade, we have witnessed a huge change in global energy geopolitics, mainly stems from the shale revolution of the United States. The U.S. became a major producer and exporter. So oil and gas import from the United States rapidly increased in Korea and in Northeast Asian countries. So now we are looking for the next stage of bilateral energy cooperation beyond the energy transaction. So it will be the starting point of today's discussion. And now I will introduce the prominent panelists today. First of all, the Deputy Assistant Secretary Melissa Simpson from the Bureau of Energy Resources. She's in charge of ENO's Energy Transformation Office and covering key U.S. energy initiatives. So once again, thank you very much for joining this session. And we also have Professor Shin Sung-min from Korea National Diplomatic Academy, and he's in charge of climate change, energy, and international legal affairs. So. And we have Vice President Jeff Moody from American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, and he's in charge of especially government relations. And based on a long career on Capitol Hill, I hope to listen to your insight on the energy and environmental agenda. And we have Professor Jung Yong-hun, currently at Jeju University. And he has long been probably the longest counselor to the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Energy, and he had been very active in the APEC Energy Institute and also Korea Energy Economics Institute, and been involved in the Iranian sanction issues and Iraq issue. So he had vast experience on the field. So I do expect a very helpful and sharp comment from Professor Chung. And also we have Vice President Kim Young-jo from ExxonMobil Korea, and he has long experience in career in ExxonMobil Korea. And as this is a track 1.5 discussion, the voice from the business sector, real business sector, will be very essential. So once again, thanks for joining in this session. So we have roughly around 90 minutes to discuss this big agenda. So I will allocate roughly around 15 minutes to each presenter. This couple of participants had a real long flight, almost 15 hours, I guess. So I usually count 1 flight hour to 1 minute presentation. So, and for the local people, I have a different conversion here. So without further ado, let me invite Ms. Melissa Simpson for the first presentation.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and be invited to participate on such an important panel on such an important topic. As has been discussed all along, we are very interested in the United States in increasing our cooperation, particularly around energy with Korea. And I wanted to explain to you a bit of detail today regarding an initiative that the U.S. State Department is leading under Secretary Mike Pompeo's leadership. About a year ago, during an Indo-Pacific Business Forum in Washington, D.C., Secretary Pompeo announced 3 initiatives that are part of the United States Indo-Pacific strategy. We at the State Department lead in the economic pillar of that strategy. And there's 3 initiatives, one dealing with energy, one dealing with digital, and one dealing with infrastructure. I have the great pleasure to be leading the energy pillar, which is an initiative called Asia Edge. And Asia Edge is a whole government effort to grow sustainable and secure energy markets throughout the Indo-Pacific. Asia Edge seeks to strengthen energy security, increase energy diversification and trade, and expand energy access across the region. We are drawing upon the expertise and resources of the U.S. government, the private sector, and international financial institutions. And the idea behind it is not just for the U.S. government to be looking for people on Capitol Hill to write big checks and enrich our budgets. What we're looking to do is to shift our existing budgets and really create a catalyst with the private industry and the private sector to have a very strong partnership. And the idea behind all of that is to really sit down with our partner governments, our partners in other countries, as well as the private sector in both the U.S. and in the partner countries to find out where the barriers are to energy trade, energy investment, increasing energy technology. We're all very interested in the transformation to a renewable energy sector, and the more that we talk about that in the U.S., the more we realize that the cross-continent partnerships with our partner countries under Asia Edge through the Indo-Pacific strategy are all the more important. Asia Edge promotes U.S. values in the Indo-Pacific under four goals. We want to strengthen the energy security of our allies and partners. We want to create open and efficient, rule-based, transparent energy markets. We want to improve free, fair, and reciprocal energy trading relationships. And we want to expand access to affordable, reliable energy. That all sounds very lofty and great. When you actually get into the meat of it, though, to try to organize a whole of government approach in the U.S., and maybe it's the same way in Korea, is quite a feat. Getting 7 agencies that all deal with various aspects of energy regulations, energy financing, and private sector outreach, all on the same page to be focusing on very specific goals has taken us almost a year. And we are quite proud of the work that we've got underway so far. We have asked our embassies in the region to please feed back information to us on what the priorities are in each of the countries that our embassy officers are working in. It won't surprise you that we've heard a lot from many of the countries that renewables are a very big focus, but also with respect to liquefied natural gas and how do we open those markets. How do we have those conversations about actual exports from the U.S. into Korea, for example, and how to keep the prices down, open for business. All of that is has been extremely interesting and important dialogue. The reason I was very much looking forward to coming to speak with you all today is to hear from your side of things what we could be doing from the U.S. perspective to be more helpful. We had a few roundtables recently with our Department of Commerce and our Advocacy Center, who held many dialogues with the private industry in the United States, all of which recognize the desire to be doing business in the Indo-Pacific and Korea specifically. But a lot of the conversation was around the desire to have a better understanding of where the roadblocks are and what we can do to cooperate with you to open up your markets. We've got several different working groups that are set up to deal with either the policy and programming and budget, or the advocacy side of things, or talking to our politicians in our U.S. Congress about how to better fund and better focus our efforts. And so far, we've been quite successful. Looking at almost a year anniversary, we expect that many of our high-level officials will be here in the region and be looking to have other dialogues with you. We'd like very much to be celebrating some deliverables, some deals. So if you are hearing what I'm saying and it sounds of interest, we're more than happy to have more detailed conversations on what we can be doing, especially with our private sector, to develop some specific partnerships with all of you. With that, I think I'll pass it on.
Thank you very much. So, as the Ms. Simpson mentioned, the Asia Edge is new initiative of the U.S. State Department, and in terms of its agenda and also geographical scope, this is new challenge. This is a new challenge, and certainly the agenda of Asia Edge may go beyond Northeast Asia. So, well, which will be discussed later also, but it is quite interesting to see the U.S. It's not just energy strategy. This is also part of a global strategy. So, and energy has long been a very important part of global strategy. So, in that sense, we are opening the door of the global strategy and energy issues and new kind of opportunities and challenges for the energy cooperation. And next, I will invite Professor Shim Sang-min for the second presentation.
Well, thank you, Chairman. It is my honor and privilege to be here and speak about Korea's energy policy and how the U.S. and Korea could cooperate in some of those energy issues. And I'd like to start by highlighting some of the current administration's energy policy objectives and the major items. And I would move on to just highlight some of the areas where U.S. and the United States and the Republic of Korea could cooperate in many different energy fields. So let me start by saying, defining the current Korean administration's energy policy, which is the energy transition policy. As people in this room already know, energy transition policy is a policy to seek cleaner, safer energy sources and moving away from dangerous and unclean energy sources. So the three pillars of the energy policy in Korea is: one, the nuclear phase out; two, the coal scale down; and third, expansion of renewables and LNG. Let me highlight some of these elements one by one. Nuclear phase off is basically a policy that intended to wean Korea off from nuclear energy. But it's a very incremental approach. We don't stop all nuclear power plants all at once. We are only planning to close down every nuclear power plant when they reach their end of the designed operational life. So if my calculation is right, the last nuclear power plant that was shut down, the year of the shutdown will take place around 2080, which is about more than 60 years ago. So we will still be somewhat reliant upon nuclear energy, but we will be cutting down on our portion of our energy, the nuclear energy, to be tapped into our energy system. And the coal scale down is a little bit tricky matter because theoretically, we are going to increase our installed capacity of coal plants in the next 12 years. But then still the objectives are clear. We will be less and less dependent upon coal power, and the government is ready to shut down some old and dirty coal power plants. The rumor has it that the Korean government had contemplated shutting down 22 coal power plants within the next decade, although it was quickly dismissed by one of the ministries in charge of the energy sector. But still, the objectives are clear. We are moving away from dirty, unclean energy sources. Third is the expansion of renewables and the LNG. Renewables are considered to be our next energy source to be tapped in a massive scale in the next couple of decades. And according to the government's plan, we will be expanding our renewable capacity to an extent, to a degree that we will achieve the 20% of our power generation from renewables by 2030. And according to the newest government plan, which is still going through some provisional writings, is that we are going to achieve the 30 to 35% of our energy needs through renewables by 2040. And that is reflected in the provisional third national energy plan. And it will be finalized by the end of this year, I think. So these are the three pillars of our government's energy policy. And what areas can we find as a future field of cooperation between Korea and the United States? One area is quite clear, as Melissa has already mentioned, the cooperation in the field of the LNG. We have successfully imported more LNGs from the United States. For example, last year we imported 4.7 million tons of LNGs from the United States only, and that is that makes the United States the third largest LNG exporter to Korea. But we could do more because the United States is quickly expanding their LNG generation capacity and the export installations. So that is the one area where the U.S. and Korea can cooperate to seek and establish energy security bilaterally. And second area would be the renewable energy. First, it could be achieved through corporate-to-corporate cooperation by co-developing some of the core technologies of the renewable energy production, or some other infrastructural development, such as the smart grid and demand response, maybe. And in terms of the specific technologies, we could do collaboration on photovoltaic techniques and fuel cell technologies. And also, I see that there's some help from the United States in the development of much safer energy storage systems would be vital in expanding Korea's renewable energy, because we have witnessed some of the energy storage devices suddenly just burning ablaze without any specific reasons. And we are still looking into what caused those fires. But in the U.S., technology is so advanced that we will be greatly helped by the assistance given by the United States technology firms and also from the U.S. government. Third area would be more collaboration in the field of oil. And in addition to the LNG, U.S. has been increasing the oil productions in a very fast way within a very short time. And last year, the Republic of Korea imported almost 86.11 million tons of million barrels of oil from the United States, which marks the Korea at the third largest importer of U.S. oil. So, and to reiterate, the U.S. is expanding its energy production capacity, and Korea is always dependent on oil for the primary energy. So the the field of oil could be another area where U.S. and the ROK can achieve more cooperation through different means. Well, cost factors might be a problem, but we've seen that some of the competition in the shipping industry helped driving down the shipping cost from the United States to Korea. So I'm just hopeful that those competition will keep down the transportation costs low, which will greatly help the financially the cooperation in the oil field between U.S. and Korea. So just to wrap up my presentation, I see a great possibility of bilateral cooperation between U.S. and Korea in the field of the energy. And I'm hopeful that we will be building stronger ties, stronger relations through more cooperation in this specific field. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shim. Professor Shim mentioned the guideline and framework of Korea's, I would say, new energy, the strategy, and the big focus has been given during the last 2 years on the faster energy transition from the fuel side of the fossil fuel side to cleaner and greener side. So we have established a couple of quite ambitious plan for that the migration, and that will accompany the quite substantial change of energy mix, and yes, the Korean government is trying very hard to find the safer but kind of the strong steps, the further steps to make a new balance between the objectives, the greener objectives, and the realities of pricings and supply schemes. And also, Professor Chin mentioned a few possible areas, few promising areas for the energy cooperation. And for those sector issues, we will have the further debate after all the presentations. Okay, and the next presenter will be Jeff Moody, and actually the following presenters and the first commentators will use PowerPoint slides. So for the convenience, I cordially ask the presenter to go down to the tables and leave wide open the screen for the presenters and the audience.
Well, good afternoon. Hopefully everybody can hear me. It's a real honor to be here with you today. I really want to thank our hosts for inviting me to speak and for the opportunity to share some of AFPM's views on U.S. energy policy and opportunities for further collaboration between our two countries. Just to start, a little bit about AFPM. We are the U.S. Refining Industry and Petrochemical Industry Trade Association in Washington, D.C. We represent about 95% of U.S. refining capacity in about nearly every petrochemical facility in the United States. You'll also see that our members include a number of biofuel companies, ethanol producers in the Midwest. You can see we have about 120 refineries, 230 petrochemical facilities, geographically dispersed throughout the United States. We also have an international component to our membership. So SK Energy is actually a member of ours. They're members in order to collaborate with our U.S. counterparts. We have a lot of information sharing, conferences, things of that nature. Just to put our space in the energy supply chain in perspective, this is a pretty simple diagram of how energy flows from upstream through to the consumer. Our members primarily occupy the middle of this chart. So the gray box labeled manufacturing at the top, although we also own quite a bit of the transportation infrastructure getting feedstock to the facilities and product to consumers. I'm going to be talking quite a bit about U.S. infrastructure, just to put a little bit in perspective. We have a little more than 200,000 miles of pipeline, 25,000 miles of inland waterways, 140,000 miles of railroad tracks, 4.1 million miles of road, and more than 1.7 billion barrels of storage in the United States. This all combines to move more than 43 million barrels per day of crude oil and refined product through our system. So we have a very robust supply chain that needs additional work, I'll say. This is just a visual representation of all our product and crude oil pipelines in the United States. You'll see we have a very developed infrastructure, especially going north-south. One of the things that we've been working on as a trade association is to get more east-west and debottleneck some of our crude oil shale plays, especially in Texas and North Dakota. So as I was thinking about how to approach this presentation, I thought it'd be helpful to put a little bit of context about how we see future energy policy. I think there's a couple key points here. First, global population is going to continue growing in the coming decades. I think everybody is well aware of that. There's also a growing global middle class as living standards improved, and that's going to mean more demand for energy, more demand for consumer products. And we have to find a way to do that affordably, reliably, but also in an environmentally friendly way. So as the refining industry, as the petrochemical industry, that's our charge. What we would say to policymakers is that too often policies inhibit one or both of these goals, and so our challenge is finding the right balance between these different goals. I talked about the population growth, and we're talking about 2.5 billion people additional by 2050, much of that coming from in Asia. And the global middle class is growing. If you just look at China and India, we're going to be about 88% of the global growth and living standards is coming here in Asia. So what that means for us is more consumption. It means more consumer products being used. It means more energy demand and that we're going to have to meet. As far as where we see the market going, this is an IEA projection. The demand growth, this is through 2030 if you can't see the chart. But you'll see global liquid demand is going to be going up by about 10 million barrels a day by the end of next decade. And so this is coming not just on road transport, but it's coming through aviation, it's coming through shipping, and most importantly, I think petrochemicals, where we see a huge opportunity for demand growth out of our sector. That's in the green bar on the right-hand side of the chart. In terms of where the demand is coming from and where the supply will come from, again, this is BP. I know one of my panelists is from Exxon. I should have used their data instead, I guess, but you'll see on the left-hand side of the chart, this is OECD countries compared to a 2017 baseline are projected to reduce their liquid fuel consumption, but that's going to be more than accounted for with non-OECD growth. And so you see that 10 million barrels a day really growing by 2040. On the right-hand side, you'll see where that supply is going to come from. This is, again, BP's projections. There's going to be a shift between OPEC, between the non-OPEC nations, so decline perhaps in Europe and other places, but with the U.S. Picking up much of the slack in addition to some of the other OPEC nations. Bottom line for the U.S. industry is, first, our export markets are going to be critical for future growth and maintaining a healthy refining and petrochemical sector. We've seen demand in the United States flat or declining. Secondly, conventional fuels are going to be very important for many decades. And I know there's many headlines about the death of the internal combustion engine, transition to electric vehicles. By all accounts, as you account for increased energy demand, this is, again, BP projecting in the purple bars there, conventional fuels as the primary source of energy for many decades, and electricity only pulling up a small amount. So we have to do this, and we have to get policy right in order to balance, again, meeting this affordably and reliably, but also environmentally friendly. I've mentioned petrochemicals a couple times, just to kind of level set on what I'm talking about. We deal in 6 main commodity chemicals. They're listed here. The Propylene and ethylene probably are the two largest traded chemicals, commodity chemicals. I'll get back to those in a second. I wanted to inject here, this is about 10%, a little less than 10% of a barrel of crude oil goes to petrochemical feedstock. So, and these things are refined into products that we use every day. I'll talk about water infrastructure, but also renewable energy. If you look at windmills, if you look at solar cells, a lot of those components are made up of petrochemicals. So as policymakers consider actions that are going to limit supply, processing of crude in favor of renewable energy, it's worth remembering what's enabling that renewable energy to happen. And so I'll get into more of this, but just in terms of where this is polyethylene and polypropylene, two major sources of plastic. Polyethylene, it's used in food packaging, water piping infrastructure, medical equipment. So as we're looking to develop and get clean water to developing nations, as we're looking to increase access to medical care, as we're looking at keeping food fresher longer, these are the types of materials that we need to make that happen. Polypropylene, similarly, is used in packaging, furniture, fibers, carpets, things like that. According to Argus Consulting, which does a lot of work in this space, demand for polyethylene is going to continue growing about 4% per year for the next several years at least. About half of that demand is coming out of China. So how are we going to meet that demand? We've talked a little bit about crude oil production already. Just to put some numbers on that, you'll see that we're expected to produce more than 13 million barrels a day by the end of next year. This is primarily light sweet crude, which is really enabling a big growth in crude oil exports. And it was mentioned by a couple of the other presenters, but this is a pretty staggering chart for those in the U.S. energy industry who've been watching this for a long time. We're looking at a 3 million barrels a day of exports by the end of next year. That's up from 500,000 barrels a day just 5 years ago. And so with the lifting of the crude export ban and the shale boom, a lot of this is going to get exported, and we expect this trend to continue, especially as IMO 2020 takes a hold early next year. I'll come back to that in a little bit. As far as where the crude is going, Asia regionally imports the most crude oil. And South Korea actually surpassed China last year as the second largest single export destination for U.S. crude. It was a little north of 200,000 barrels a day, so a pretty significant amount. This is out of EIA. I would say the biggest barriers to actually increasing that could actually come on the U.S. side, and I'm thinking of things like takeaway capacity, so pipeline infrastructure, particularly in Texas, out of the Permian Basin, storage capacity at our ports, and then port development and maintenance. So I'm thinking specifically of things like widening and deepening the Houston Ship Channel to enable future exports. And so those are some things that we're working on the U.S. side to enable more energy exports out of our major energy producing centers. On the product side, U.S. gasoline demand and production have actually converged for the first time since the 1970s. This is going to enable more gasoline exports out of the U.S. That's primarily going to Mexico and Latin America on the gasoline side. On the distillate side, diesel is actually quite a bit to going to Europe at this point. So that's the biggest difference between those two markets. Natural gas liquids, ethane, there's been an 80% increase since 2011 in NGL production. That's attracting a lot of investment into the U.S. on ethylene production. This is from Argus Media. Just to put a little perspective here, North America, we're projected to increase ethylene production. This is one of those base commodity chemicals by 25% just by 2021. That'll be a 50% increase in capacity over 2013. So a massive new investment, billions of dollars worth of investment in U.S. petrochemical capacity, and much of that's going to be used to satisfy export markets. Northeast Asia, you'll see, is actually increasing its capacity as well, but Argus projects that Northeast Asia will still be increasing imports of polyethylene in the coming years to satisfy increased demand. So North America will continue to export, Asia will continue to import, although that'll come down a little bit. So just to talk a little bit about some of the factors that we look at enabling environments. I could probably talk all day about this, but three major buckets: markets and financial, regulatory, legal, and then kind of broadly social. On the market side, access to resources, so low-cost feedstock to the refineries. So in the U.S., we're obviously very blessed with crude oil and natural gas and the ability to tap those. Infrastructure, both to get feedstock to our facilities and then product to consumers. Access to capital, so that's credit markets and the like. On the regulatory side, the ability to permit, build, and then actually run our facilities in an efficient way. So again, the regulations have to be balanced and enable that. Tax policy. Rule of law and judiciary. One of the major things that our companies look for as they're looking to invest abroad is, do we have dispute resolution mechanisms? Are contracts going to be honored, or are investments going to be put at risk? So those are the types of things we're looking for, as well as intellectual property protection. And then finally, on the social side, a skilled workforce. And this is not just the STEM engineers, which we obviously need. We need chemical engineers and other advanced degrees, but we also need skilled labor. The U.S. is going to be short, for instance, millions of welders by the end of the next decade as our population continues to age. And so our companies are heavily investing in community colleges to get more skilled labor into our facilities, because it's going to be a big need to enable production. I talked a little bit about the production costs. This is again Argus Consulting, who was kind enough to provide some of their data, but you'll see that just the cost difference in some of the feedstock costs between the U.S. and Middle East versus Europe and Asia. U.S. uses ethane as a primary feedstock. Other parts of the world use naphtha, and that cost basis is pretty wide. I will note, though, that European and Asian petrochemical manufacturers have been investing in flexibility to take more ethane. So this has likely come down. I think this chart's nearly a year old at this point. I think these costs have come down since that time as those flexibilities have been put in place. But it underscores why so much investment's been going into the U.S. is to take advantage of the natural gas. I've talked about pipelines. So this is just to reiterate that our pipeline mileage in the U.S. is there in blue. That's gone up 25% just since 2004. So we've been increasing pipeline mileage, but not as quick as our demand or as our production for crude oil and natural gas have been going up. So this is why I talk about the need to build more infrastructure. The black line there is actual production of crude oil and natural gas, and then the green is the forecast range. So as we grow U.S. crude and natural gas production, we're going to need more pipelines in order to get it to global markets. This is a big point of focus for AFPM. One of the major kind of bottlenecks, we have many, I'll say, to building pipelines. I'll point one out here. Something we call the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. It's a compelled review by federal agencies to look at the environmental impacts of any major federal action they're going to take. There's some things exempted from it, but things like building a pipeline are going to be subject to NEPA. We've seen a 60% increase in review time since the year 2000, and this dissuades investment as companies don't want to put money in. So the administration's been doing an excellent job, the Trump administration, in doing things like streamlining and trying to get down to one point of decision between these agencies, one record of decision, stricter timelines, trying to get these review times down so we can get more infrastructure built. I have one slide here, kind of trying to summarize everything about U.S. energy policy on the liquid side, and I don't think I was successful. But two things to start with. In the U.S., we have a system of cooperative federalism where we have the federal government and state governments with concurrent jurisdiction on many issues, or in the case of statutes like the Clean Air Act, where you have the federal government setting a standard and the state governments actually implementing them in the state implementation plans.
ExxonMobil is working to be part of the solution. our climate change risk management strategy consists of 4 pillars. One is mitigating emissions in our operations. Second one is developing scalable technology solutions. And third one is providing solutions for our customers. And the fourth one is engaging on climate change policy. So, but the thing is, I was trying to, well, if this was my personal opinion, I have many things to say about the negative side of what we are doing business here, but since I should be neutral, we are really working hard. I mean, not only the U.S. energy policy, but the Korean side of energy policy. I mean, we are really scrutinizing the 13th gas demand plan and 3rd basic energy plan. And so, but when like the headquarters ExxonMobil, we normally have set up like a outlook, energy outlook, like 40 years ahead of us, like 2040. But so one part of our energy outlook is we anticipate that global energy needs will rise about 25% over the period to 2040, led by non-OECD countries. And like efficiency gains and growing use of less carbon intensive energy sources will continue to be a nearly 45% decline in the carbon intensity of global GDP. And regarding the renewable energy, we anticipate that like worldwide electricity from solar and wind will increase about 400%. So in summary, like the company like ExxonMobil, like we are seeking every opportunities in Korea. I mean, what we can add value to the Korean industry, in not only in the gas and oil and gas industry, but also in technology aspect and all the energy-related industry. So these days, I mean, mainly I'm engaged in oil and gas business, but in my lubricants and fuel and lubricants and also chemical, they have a smaller scale than gas and oil business, but still they are also trying to work hard with not only the state-owned companies or the government, but also these days the private companies are also, like for gas example, they are trying to import directly. So we are these days trying to engage with those private companies more often than the previous years, because like, okay. Yeah, so in summary, I think doing business in Korea is tough sometimes because there's a lot of regulations and the policy changes sometimes very often. I mean, swift, like when the new government comes, the policy changes so quite often. So like our company, we have a long vision, like 20, like 40 years, 50 years, but when the policy changes, we somehow have to change too, because if we want to do business in Korea, I mean, we cannot just do by ourselves. So the thing is, changing that kind of thing, sometimes in the headquarters, they have difficulty because like we have all the budget and all the technology things set up, but when the policy changes quite often, we somehow have difficulty in doing business in Korea sometimes. And transparency is also what we are trying to expect from the Korean government side too. So I think those two are the very important factors that we might want to ask, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kim. So we have finished the three designated presentations and discussion. And before opening the floor, let me briefly ask a few questions to the designated three presenters. And to some degree, the Professor Chong already kind of replied to the Mr. Moody's the presentation. But first to Ms. Simpson, when the Asia Edge concept is a relatively new one. This is very, very young, and when I first came across this concept, and when I was following up this concept, I raised a few questions to my colleague in the United States, and also in some other energy sectors. Still, some of them are familiar with this concept, and some of them are were actually re-asking me, well, what was it? So I tried to explain. This Asia Edge concept. Was paraphrasing, and the most similar the working definition I found was it was something like the energy version of free and open in the Pacific strategy. But actually, it is somewhat more than that. Okay, and then two instant question and inquiry I found was, isn't it? It might have been a very common question. Isn't it kind of something like a countermeasure to Belt and Road Initiative of China in South and Southeast Asia? We might have heard this kind of the question. And my second question is, what is real key focus of Asia Edge strategy? The supply side, finding a new market, or infrastructure side, or something else?
I'll answer the second question first. The key focus is energy security, both for the United States and for our partners and allies across the world. We have a strong belief that if our partners and allies have energy security, the world is more secure. Now, the benefits of U.S. trade policy and the U.S. focus in the Indo-Pacific with respect to trading technology, best management practices, regulations, having a common theme around transparency, which we've heard all along here today, certainty for industry, that if they're doing business with a country, that in fact they will get a permit within a reasonable time, so that they can raise the appropriate capital to be able to make the kinds of investments that they need, and to have the flexibility that they need to change nimbly as governments tend to change. That's all part of the focus. And so yes, it is a new concept for the United States, and like I mentioned, it's only been just less than a year since we came up with it. But right now, what we're trying to do is focus on building the coalition and ensuring that our partners and allies are seeing what this investment in having common ground and a level playing field will do to benefit everyone.
Great. Thank you very much. And to Professor Shim, you have mentioned the three key concept of Korea's energy transition: the nuclear side, and the coal side, and LNG side. It might be a little bit the tricky question, but on the nuclear side, Korea's position is double-edged. One is we are talking about phasing, very gradual phasing out or dismantling, but at the same time, Korea is exporting is trying to export the nuclear facilities. So how do you see what is the kind of challenge and opportunity in this kind of nuclear sector with the United States, for example?
I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer that question, but let me speak based on my personal capacity as an academic researcher. Well, as Professor Lee rightly mentioned, the nuclear issue is a kind of a love-hate relationship among the Korean population, because Korea has been so indebted to nuclear energy for the inexpensive power supply. But at the same time, people were so concerned about the nuclear safety issues, given what happened in 2012 in Fukushima, and stories about some of the mismanagement in the nuclear industries within the Korean Peninsula. But at the same time, we have to just export our way to stay prosperous in the long time to come. So we are kind of in a contradictory position that we need to pull away from unsafe energy sources, but at the same time, we would have to find every other way to gain international markets through whatever means, including the nuclear energy. So some people are sarcastically asking whether we are exporting our bats to gain goods from other international markets. My short answer is yes, but that's what it is, and that's how it goes in Korea, so to speak.
Yes, and thank you, and sorry, Professor Shima. I know how hard to answer to this question, but we may not tackle this issue in a deep dive, but actually at some point, well, for the curiosity of some general public, I made a preemptive question to you, and to Mr. Moody, you mentioned, well, you actually showed the perspective of the U.S. petrochemical industries and some opportunities and what is going on. Well, certainly, well, it looks like a hot summer and heyday for the U.S. chemical industry nowadays. The kind of Henry Hub is still kind of competitive, and the many U.S. petrochemical and chemical companies can guarantee kind of relatively cheaper and good quality their supply. But but on the other hand, in Korea and in many other Northeast Asian countries, the major petrochemical and chemical countries are facing a much more challenging environment because competitors are getting stronger, in a sense, and somehow that sort of threat and concern may couple with nowadays quite aggressive U.S. trade policy. So, and Korea is witnessing what is going on very carefully, what is going on between China and the U.S. And we are also thinking about what would be the next kind of picture, what would be the content in the next chapter of the book. So, but there is certainly, there is an opportunity, but also there is a concern and challenges. So how would you, what kind of message representing the U.S., the industry, but not just get ready for the next round. Not if you're not delivering this message, then what is your message to the Korean industry and audience for a more cooperative next chapter?
So next chapter. So just to clarify the question, next chapter of
The bilateral energy relations.
That's a great question. I think the message is we're open for business, and we're anxious to find partners, economic partners, in kind of a fair, level playing field, as Melissa talked about. So, we have a lot of investment going to the U.S. right now. I think in my presentation I talked about how we see U.S. demand for both refined products and petrochemical products really leveling out, and so. We're anxious to enter new markets and find partners. So open for business, I think, is probably the message.
And do you also see the kind of the opportunity in the midstream sector too, not just downstream, but?
Sure. I mean, a lot of capital has been freed up through tax reform and some of these other policies, and so I know companies, and Exxon's certainly one of them, looking to to deploy that capital efficiently. So it's finding the right policy environment, the right demand environment to do that.
Thank you very much. And now I will open the floor. So I may collect a couple of questions and go back to the last the replies from the presenters. Any question? Okay, first and second.
I am Mr. Oplas from Philippines. I write sometimes I write an energy column in the newspaper. I think that my comment is that I think that Korea and the rest of Asia should take advantage while Trump and in America and Morrison in Australia, because I saw the data. Korea coal consumption is about 86 million tons oil equivalent in 2017, which is even lower than Japan, 120 million tons, and Taiwan about 60. So your coal dependence is still high. So I think it's you develop Korea, Japan developed because of conventional oil. Now, if you want to get out of conventional oil, I think you will be committing economic suicide. So it is important that. So I think that the good thing is that, like for instance, Morrison, I promised to expand coal development in Australia, where the Labour say they will kill. So the Labour lost last week. The Labour Party lost. So that means cheaper coal prices, and for Korea, Japan, etc., that are dependent on coal, that would be good news. But yeah, and I don't know how the energy sector in Korea would respond to the repeated bullying that you should get out of conventional and love wind, solar. Thank you.
Do you have any particular presenter or commentator to answer your question?
Mr. Sim and maybe Geoff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Why don't we collect one or two more questions and wrapping up? Okay.
My name is David Weich, and I'm from the U.S. Embassy in Seoul, and my question is for Professor Jung. If I understood you correctly, in your presentation, you suggested that the United States and Korea may want to consider a strategic alliance on energy, and you suggested that a key part of that would be energy infrastructure. Do you have some specific suggestions on what kind of infrastructure, for example, LNG plants versus, say, smart grids, and where we should look, which particular countries?
Right. If there is no further question, then I will go back to the final wrapping up comments. So why don't we start from Mr. Moody, Professor Shim, and then Ms. Simpson. If you want to add any final comment, you will be welcome. And also the two commentators may add briefly the final comment. So, shall we get started? Jeff?
Sure. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to direct the first question to, so maybe I'll defer to Professor Shim. I would just wrap up by saying thank you again for allowing me to speak to you. It's been fascinating to listen to some of the other presenters. I think as the U.S. refining petrochemical industry, we see a lot of opportunity for further dialogue, and look forward to it. So.
Well, thank you for your wonderful question. I believe that Korea will, for a long time to come, be dependent on oil for our nation's primary energy needs, because we are so dependent on the oil, crude oil, and other refined oil for our transportation need and also for our industrial needs. What my government is now focusing on is to slowly move away from the unsafe and unclean energy sources, including oil. So that is the policy policy objective, and that will hopefully be achieved through very carefully designed policy measures in the long time to come. And weaning our nation off oil probably will take a long time because we've been so integrated into the supply of oil for our industrial needs and in our exportation of the goods. But I'm still positive that over time the technologies will be found to take some other energy sources to power our economy, and with that, Korea will be slowly using less oil, or Korea will be more efficient on using oil, so that we will be using less oil in powering our economy. Would that be an easy task? I'm not very positive, but I believe in my country's ingenuity and the people's talent in achieving great policy goals within a certain time framework. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you again for attending this informative dialogue. I would just close by saying that the United States government is very committed to seeing the success of Asia Edge, and it's dialogues like this that we find to be most fruitful in sharing ideas and being able to learn how best to focus our resources and our technology and our financing and our best management practices towards a common goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chong. Yep. For a brief, final comment.
I think the area. I think they'll include. I think the infrastructure is inclusive. LNG terminals, receiving terminals in particular, receiving terminals, and also smart grid and conventional power plants. You know, if say this is an assumption, if denuclearization becomes successful, for example, in beyond our northern border, you know, perhaps one of the key compensation package will be the energy package, because they don't have energy resources per se. They have some anthracite coal, but they have a huge problem electricity. Also for boilers, they don't have fuel. So the whole package, I think, the compensation package will include, mostly energy for at least for the beginning. Okay, so this North Korea issue, and also beyond North Korea, there's Mongolia, and they are growing economies. Mongolia, all the way to the STAN countries, so-called STAN countries. This area is developing really fast. Their economy is growing. That's what ADB report says. And still, even though the Chinese One Belt One Road covers, they claim to cover a lot of this region, but as I show in my graph, they're only minimal, maybe less than 5% of total investment requirements covered. So, for example, petrochemicals, PE, PP, all these materials are absolutely necessary for the construction of infrastructure, whatever you build. You need the pipes, you need, structures. So, in the long run, probably you will need to supply a lot of this to these areas. And one of the things I should emphasize is
Professor
that
Chong,
just one.
Yep. Okay. Sure. Yep.
We have overcapacity in petrochemicals, overcapacity in refining, globally. So searching for a market will be a big challenge, not only for the United States, for every supplier. So.
Thank you, Professor Kim.
Well, just to briefly mention that I think U.S. and Korea have a very promising future in the energy sector, especially when DOE and the Korean government, I think with a great support, I think like many Korean companies should invest in U.S. and many U.S. companies have someday will invest a lot in Korea, so vice versa. So hopefully in the near future we can see a lot of that kind of investment going back and forth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have wrapped up the session on the Korea-U.S. energy cooperation. Actually, some of the other panelists may have another kind of further extension of discussion pretty soon. So I will now formally wrap up the Jeju Forum session on the Korea-U.S. energy cooperation. And once again, I thank the great panelists and the audience for their great presentation, discussion, and attention. So please join me sending big round of applause to the panelists. Thank you very much.